We are officially streaming.
Excellent. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the Sacramento Area Council of Governments Policy and Innovation Committee meeting for Monday, February 7th, 2022. And it is just a couple minutes after 10 a.m. and we're going to get started. Are there any agenda updates, Robert?
Yes, we are going to be taking the agenda out of order today. We're going to be moving item 6 up to item 4 slot, and we will have a closed session item. So you will have to retune in for after the closed session to see the rest of the agenda live.
All right, fantastic. Will you go ahead and call the roll?
Before I do that, just a few housekeeping announcements. As you may have just heard, this meeting is being recorded. For our committee members, if you are not speaking, please be sure to mute yourself. And for any member of the public wishing to make a public comment, please refer to the agenda online. Okay, and then directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bernasconi. Absent. Burris.
Present.
Frericks.
I'm here.
Stollard.
Present.
Vice Chair Middleton. Absent. Vice Chair Thomas.
Here.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Here. Okay, if everybody will stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, this is the part of our, up next, the part of our meeting where we can take public communication on items that are not on the agenda. Robert, do we have any requests to speak on something not on the agenda?
No public comment.
Okay, fantastic. We'll take up the consent calendar then. If any directors would like to pull something for discussion, this is the time to indicate so, and if not, we will. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Thomas and a second by Director Stollard. Robert, will you please call the roll?
Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi. Absent. Burris.
Yes.
Frericks.
Yes.
Stollard.
Yes.
Vice Chair Middleton. Absent. Vice Chair Thomas.
Yes.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, excellent. Please call the next item.
The next item is our closed session item. It's a conference with labor negotiators. Eric Johnson, case liaison, and Loretta Sue will be representing SACOG. At this time, we're going to be stopping the live stream.
Okay, just a few more moments. Streaming is still taking a moment to upload. Okay, confirming that streaming is going and recording has been resumed.
Excellent. Okay. Anything to report from the closed session portion of our meeting, Robert?
There's no reportable action.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, we're going to resume the regular portion of our Policy and Innovation Committee for February 7th, 2022 at this time. And we, as stated earlier, are going to take up item number 6 from the agenda in front of items 4 and 5. And I guess, Robert, will you please call that item?
Sure. Okay. Item 6 is adopt SACOG racial equity statement of change and commitment, presented by James.
And Chair Kozlowski, I want to give the floor over to Chair Jennings, who has been chairing this working group for the last 14 months and wanted to come here this morning. So over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We're delighted to have you here, Director Jennings.
Thank you very much, Chair Kozlowski. I really appreciate it. And I thank you for taking me out of order on your agenda, your important agenda today. It's a pleasure to be speaking to this committee today. I think many of you know that I'm the chair of the esteemed Race, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. And the honor of speaking to you today about the important work that we're doing is so important to me. At our last working group meeting, which took place on the 14th of January, the group finalized and endorsed the statement that we sent to you here today. At that time, we set a statement of change and commitment. And I apologize for the phone ringing. I can't seem to stop that. So I'm trying to focus while that phone continues to ring. But anyway, we wanted to set a high level direction of the ongoing racial and equity efforts here at SACOG and serve as a guidepost to the board, the staff, and the member agencies. I want to share that this statement was thoughtfully and carefully crafted and received unanimous endorsement from the working group members. If the Policy and Innovation Committee recommends today that the board approve this statement, it would demonstrate that SACOG is committed to working to undo past harms that still plague our nation today and making future policy and program decisions that work towards racially just and equitable outcomes. I know this is a hard task and it will take time, but this is an important first step. I'm also very happy to give you some incredibly good news, and that is Sacramento WTS, which stands for Women's Transition Seminar Chapter, has selected our Racial Equity Working Group and the types of efforts that we're putting into this statement for the 2021 Rosa Parks Diversity Leadership Award. WTS stated in their letter that they received many nominations for this award, but our working group stood out for its proactive approach in addressing inequity. So as you can see, our efforts are being recognized and appreciated. I had the opportunity yesterday to go to the Guild Theater and see the Ruby Bridges original movie. Many of you know Ruby Bridges for her work in being the first in Louisiana to be able to go to an all-white school. I saw that movie and I can't help but tell you that my wife and I cried through the entire movie. What she had to go through in order to leave a lasting legacy is something that no one should have to go through. I think our statement of change and commitment is one that will stand the test of time for SACOG and for many years to come. It will leave a lasting legacy of the work that we've done here today. So I want to thank you for your time and consideration. I'm happy if you have time to answer any questions. Other than that, I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, James Corliss. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair Jennings. It's always a hard act to follow, but I do want to just add in from the staff's perspective on this, a little bit of the history, a little bit of where we've gone and where we're going. So as the memo lays out to you for this racial equity statement, and I know everybody knows this, and we've been around these discussions for a while here at SACOG, but in the summer of 2020, with the murder of George Floyd and everything that happened that summer, then Chair Lucas Frericks did put together a Race Equity Inclusion Working Group. We did not actually issue a board statement at that time, but we wanted to be thoughtful. We wanted to be intentional. And frankly, I think that was the right way to go, because we really had not talked about issues of racial equity, certainly in my time here at the board. So we wanted to be intentional. That working group, I think, laid some really important groundwork. It commissioned an audit, and it really put the wheels in motion for the working group that then was sort of reformed in the beginning of 2021, which I think also was very important in as much as it had 10 SACOG board members, but also 10 public members, 10 external experts that I just think have really been They have been so thoughtful and helpful and constructive. I know many of them wanted to come to this committee meeting this morning. I think some of them are going to try to make it to the full board meeting if you move this forward. So the statement and that working group, I just want to remind everybody, the charge of that working group, really the work of the working group, is threefold. The first is to develop a statement of change and commitment that's before you this morning. The second is to use that statement to then actually put together an action plan, a racial equity action plan, which will follow on the commitments that are spelled out in the statement, but really in a much more specific way. Really give us a sort of a roadmap, if you will, around embedding racial equity into our work, into our operations, internal, external, et cetera. And then finally, the third task of the working group is to really give us some guidance around the long-range plan, around what we're now calling the 2024 blueprint, formerly known as the MTP-SES. So those are the three tasks. You have the first task and the first product of that work in front of you this morning. As Chair Jennings said, we had really good discussion actually back in November at the first REI working group meeting. And there were two major issues that were brought up. One was, and we spent a lot of time on this, really defining populations by race, ethnicity, and making sure that we were inclusive. The second was acknowledging other disparities that exist. Disparities by geography, by rural versus urban, disparities by income, by wealth, by wealth versus poverty. And I want to reassure you, and I want to point to the beginning of the statement now that really tries to spell out, we see those inequities. We obviously know, we all know those exist. I think we can always do more work, and we need to do more, both by income, but also frankly, by rural versus urban. But this statement and this work is specifically focused on disparities by race and ethnicity. I want to also just acknowledge, as Chair Jennings said, a lot of work went into this statement. I really want to thank the staff, the SACOG staff. We've had a team that's been researching, looking at other statements around the country, around the state, among other local governments. And they put a lot of time and effort into really helping craft this statement. So I want to thank them. As Chair Jennings said, it got unanimous endorsement for the REI working group. But of course, you're the reporting committee. And so we are very eager and ready to answer any questions from all of you this morning. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Back to you, Chair Kozlowski.
Excellent. Thank you both, James and Rick. So I was not a part of the development of this statement up until this point, and I am grateful for the opportunity to add 2 cents. I'd like to, before we get into a discussion of this, acknowledge that the statement in its totality and goals and, what it's trying to get at is excellent in virtually every way. So I don't want anybody to interpret the 2 word choices that I'm going to challenge and the 1 bit of phrasing that I'm going to challenge slightly as anything more than just an intent to make this stronger and perfectly defensible for a lot of different audiences that there might be. But before we get to my thoughts, I was hoping that I could kick this over to the other directors and see what input they might have, suggestions, thoughts, or other commentary. So,
is it possible to screen share the statement so we could be looking at it while we're talking about it?
Yeah. Robert, could you guys bring up page 19 of the agenda?
Just a second here.
Yeah.
While we're doing that, if I may ask
Yeah.
Chair Jennings a question?
Sure.
All right. I'm curious about what was the most difficult part of the development of this statement, and what conversations were the most challenging that your committee had?
When you have a committee of that size and each individual is strong in their own right, each one of us could write this statement by ourselves and we'd come up with 20 different statements. So what we talked about was a statement that we felt we could all stand behind. But I think when we move to the action plan, that's going to be where the real work is going to be done. The statement will be important to guide us, but the real work comes in the actual action plan and putting that together. And so I think the committee is anticipating getting this to the full board for approval so we can then move to the action planning session. But, you know, just the fact that you had such strong people in the room and everybody had a wonderful opinion. So you had to kind of accept maybe other people's opinion and allow yours to not dominate the room. Does that answer your question?
It does. Interesting. Yeah, that's difficult to do with a room of leaders, like you say, that feel strongly about an issue.
Exactly.
And I, for one, have to, commend the committee. It's incredibly hard to craft such a concise statement that's so emotionally charged with such deep-seated need. And I think you did a tremendous job. I appreciated the background information as to why we're here and what we need to address. I think that was incredibly well done. So anyone can pull this up and understand that, because without having that background information, you wouldn't perhaps have context for the rest of the information and the action plan. So I appreciated that. It certainly raises awareness and demonstrates SACOG's intention to be thoughtful in terms of transportation and land use planning, given the history of land use and transportation planning. And I just commend you for a job well done. I do appreciate, James, your comments regarding the other disparities that I know we had brought up in other conversations around race and equity and diversity and challenges. And I appreciate that those other disparities are identified in the beginning. And I fully recognize that that's not what this is about. But I appreciate that once again, it opens thought and makes us aware that this will always be, as we really address inequity in the world, that it will be an ongoing conversation that will have lots of facets that will need a targeted approach depending on what it is. So just really well done, Chair Jennings.
Excellent. We have the draft on the screen now. It probably could be enlarged a little bit, Renee, if you're able to do that, if anybody is reading it on the screen.
I'll zoom in a little.
Yeah, thank you. And there's actually a second page to it that has the two final bullet points.
Oh, that's important. I'm one of the things I'm thinking as I look at it, first of all, I think it's long. and there's no end to what you could write and say, and I'm sure you'd agree with that, Rick. But it might be nice if before those initial paragraphs it just said background, so we know this isn't the plan, this is the background, this is the foundation for the plan, and then before the bullet points, call it the plan or the program, so that because isn't that what we're looking at essentially for action, is those 5 bullet points at the end? So that's the essence of it. I think all of us have had a lot of exposure to things that we know are wrong and they're recorded there. But these 5 things are the action, and keeping that as concise as possible, in my view, is wise, so that we can really put focus on fewer things than more things.
Okay. Director Frericks, your comments? Questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm very supportive of this effort, certainly, as evidenced by just participation and instigation and actions on this. I think it's pretty important for us to take an action and, adopt this at the board level. I think that we're in a situation where it's also, I think, I feel like this is I think a number of folks have alluded to this as well. This is a consistent and sort of ongoing process, right? It very much iterative process. It's not just a one and done thing. So, I think that also I would say, I think that the Chair Jennings mentioned this in response to Director Thomas's comments, but I think was really, it's funny because I had basically the same answer, which was, you have 10 separate elected leaders in this group who all have very strong opinions. And it was interesting actually to have, and I think a very important component to continue to feature and have folks from the greater community that are not sort of sitting at the board table and in the boardroom, so to speak. I think that has been a major strength in this process and sort of as the evolution of it, and from the first year to the second year. And I do think that having, to Director Stallard's points, I mean, having, sort of this real emphasis on the 5 sort of points, I mean, like more concise, but specifically sort of the points of action. I mean, and I think it's pretty succinct in that regard. I mean, there's background and it's very important, but yes, this issue of, truly listening and learning the plan, supporting the acting, the measuring, I think those are all very, very key to the, it's sort of as a package. So really appreciate, looking forward to hearing your proposed sort of suggestions as well. But I think it's something that I don't think there's honestly anything to sort of be afraid of here. I think this is something that we do really well in this region of coming together and discussing difficult issues and working collaboratively to sort of get through these types of things and address some of these long-standing issues. And it's something that I feel like is definitely needed as an agency.
Director Burris, do you have comments, questions, suggestions?
I'll keep my comments relatively brief. I'm really happy with the language here. I want to just highlight that I'm really happy with the emphasis on paying attention to the regional marginalization and the fact that, again, measuring the equitability impacts across different parts of the region, you're going to see a huge difference from urban to rural communities, and having that community involvement and that stakeholder feedback. So I just wanted to voice my appreciation for that, but that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Well, listen, I have just 3 things, and none of them is a hill that I want to die on. I think that they could potentially improve things just a little bit, but they might only improve them for my pedantic brain. So if you could actually scroll up to the top of the document, the first of those is in the very first sentence, where it says the Sacramento Area Council of Governments acknowledges that residents living in the greater 6 County Sacramento region face significant inequities. Using the word significant right there suggests that, and not qualifying which residents, but suggesting that all of them face significant inequities, I think is a little bit confusing in terms of what we're trying to get to here. I think that you could probably rightly say that all residents face some sort of inequity. And I think that you could say that some residents face significant equity, but it's a spectrum of experiences, right? So again, this is, I'm fine with the language as it is. It's just a little bit imprecise for my pedantic brain. Okay, so that's one spot. The other, if you can scroll down to the 3rd paragraph there where it says, as a government entity, SACOG has perpetuated and sustained these long-standing policies. And it's referring back to the previous paragraph where it mentions policies related to redevelopment, policies related to redlining, and policies related to the siting of highways, and how they disrupted, neighborhoods that were once thriving. SACOG as an entity itself, I don't think has been around long enough to have a direct impact on redlining or highway siting. And I would suggest that its, role in redevelopment is, kind of not as directly strong as this might indicate. So I think it is absolutely correct for SACOG to acknowledge that it has a role in perpetuating the inequities that exist to some extent. I think this leaves the impression that we had SACOG itself as an entity may have had more of a role than it actually did. So again, I'm fine with the language as it is. I just think it's a little bit imprecise. And then the last one is right in the middle of that paragraph where it's SACOG has an obligation to tackle these inequities. The word tackle for me is squishy. It's very illustrative of, trying to make change or to wrestle something to the ground. But I think the more precise thing to say is some combination of these three words, which is acknowledge, understand, and reduce. And I think reduce is an excellent substitute by itself, but having those other two modifiers might make it that much stronger. So if I was going to, pick one of those three things to ask for a change from the REI committee, it would be to swap out the word tackle. And with extreme respect for your football career, Chair Jennings, I apologize. So that was my comments. I share everybody's opinion that we're heading in absolutely the right direction, and the work of the committee has been terrific, and the result is outstanding. So I'll take any support for those changes if that's possible at this late date, and any motion to make a recommendation to the wider board on making this our full statement for SACOG. And I think you can take it off the screen now.
I was still looking for the word tackle. I can't believe that I missed that word of all the words that were in this statement, that I missed the word tackle.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't something that I did as a player. So I would have taken that out.
Anyway, yeah, I think I love that word in terms of the sort of all of the imagery it embodies, but I think it's imprecise in this particular sentence.
Okay.
So,
Chair Kozlowski, if I, as always, I appreciate your pedantic thoughts here, because look, language matters, right? And words matter, right? And I think when we get into issues of racism and racial inequities, words really matter, and they strike people in different ways. What I would say about, I'm not going to get into the sort of the specifics, but I think. And Director Thomas asked the same question. What were the hard things here, right? In addition to the whole thing, in addition to all of it, and it will be hard to make good on this, which is really the work ahead for us, right? Go from the statement to the actions, as Director Stollard has mentioned. But I will say we had a lot of internal debate in a very healthy way around the second thing I think you flagged around what was SACOG's role. Okay. Do you remember, and I look to others here on my staff who actually have even a more precise finger on this, but our predecessor organization actually grew up in the 1960s, came to being in the 1960s. And even this iteration of SACOG dates back to 1981. And what I would say is this, right? And I think this relates to how we're trying to actually understand how these policies and programs still persist today, because while they are outlawed and illegal, they still present themselves, right? And so the point here, I think, is we didn't do anything for a long time. We didn't do anything. We weren't affirmative. We didn't actually say we've got to actually reverse some of these trends that actually denied people of color home ownership, right? We kind of stayed silent. And that's, I think, a very important point in this. And I'm not, again, quibbling with your edit at all, right? I'm just saying, I think, because that is a very reasonable question to ask. Hey, look, we weren't around. It wasn't our fault. But actually, we were around, and actually, we didn't do anything. And that's a little bit of what we're trying to say here. And again, if we can say it in a better way, I'm not going to argue with that. I just think the history actually is very important.
Well, I don't want to wordsmith this one to death, but then you could just as easily say through SACOG, through its action and inaction perpetuated. That would have been the precise way to capture that in a succinct way. But like I said, the statement stands as I'm satisfied with it, with the possible exception of changing tackle to reduce. or acknowledge, understand, and reduce. And if the committee feels otherwise, I'm happy to accept it in its form as we see it.
I'd be interested in Rick's feedback on that suggestion. Rick?
No, I don't have any issue at all with the word tackle unless James or the staff has a reason as to why that word was chosen. If there's some historic value to that. And if it doesn't, I think we could change that pretty easily and the committee wouldn't feel any kind of resistance to that at all. The other two, I don't, I think you're okay with it. It being, somewhat confusing or imprecise to some, but the committee went through it in detail and they were okay with the other two. So I think the one we want to change immediately would be the word tackle to reduce, which I don't think takes away from the content of what we presented in front of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other commentary from directors? Thoughts? Mr. Frericks.
I'll let Director Thomas go first. She's
I'm
had
sorry.
her hand up as well.
I'm
too.
missing the little yellow hand. I apologize.
That's okay, no problem.
Director
They're hard to find
Thomas.
sometimes. Just great conversation. I appreciate that. I agree with the word tackle. That was very thoughtful, Mike. Interesting. I like your wordsmithing perhaps better in terms of that word. As far as the background, I support the background information as it stands right now. I think as I read it, I did not read that SACOG is directly responsible for all of this. I did not take that. I think it provides universal context that is true across our nation. And I think it's important to have that because the policies and the land use issues and the transportation, issues and policies that we deal with are also pretty consistent against in terms of federal, state, and local policy. So having a more universal context to the background of how we got here with this issue, I think is really important in providing a solid foundation for this. So I appreciate your thoughts.
Director Frericks.
A couple quick points. I do appreciate that suggested changes. I think that certainly the tackle to reduce would be, is completely acceptable. I actually, I don't have a strong feeling on the other two per se, but I think I would sort of associate my comments with Director Thomas's, just sort of in terms of the rest of the background. I think if we, are to pass sort of this item as slightly amended, coupled with the suggestion from Director Stallard about sort of, just be more explicit about background and sort of, the plan, so to speak, I think would be really helpful. But otherwise, I'm happy to move the item as amended with those sort of two changes. So the Director Kozlowski change and Director Stallard sort of adjustment.
Thomas, second.
Excellent. Okay, so recommended approval by Director Frericks with a second by Director Thomas with two slight modifications to the language, swapping the word tackle for reduce in the third paragraph and adding a heading break that will separate the background from the plan. Director Jennings, any objections to any of that?
No, I think those are excellent suggestions, excellent ideas. We haven't done anything to take away from the content of the statement. I think they are excellent as far as clarity and Tom, I think it helps me tremendously anytime I see a roadmap that helps me to go from one point to the other. So I think those are excellent suggestions. I think they'll be received well by the committee.
Excellent. Okay, wayfinding. So we have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
And just for the record, there's no public comment on this item. All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi? Absent. Burris?
Yeah.
Frericks?
Aye.
Stallard?
Aye.
Vice Chair Middleton? Absent. Vice Chair Thomas?
Aye.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Excellent. And James and Chair Jennings, thank you very much to the staff and your committee for bringing this forward. It's a lot of work, but it's good, righteous work that we need to do. So thank you.
And Chair Kozlowski, I just want to say again that I appreciate your recognition of the staff involvement, and they put a lot into this. So thank you for that. And also just obviously Chair Jennings, thank you you really wanted to be here today. I really appreciate you, and Director Frericks. And I know Director Middleton really wanted to be here this morning, and something came up the last minute for her. But having served both of them on the REI working, of course, Director Frericks kind of commissioning this, just want to say there's a lot of thanks to go around and appreciation from us as the staff. Thank you.
My final comments. I go through this thing all the time in my head. It's something that I learned from Xerox Corporation. And it's a process that I go through in my head. It says you plan, you organize, you implement, you monitor, you recognize. You plan, you organize, you implement, you monitor, you recognize. And too often we get in the planning and organizing, and we get lost in planning and organizing to the point that we never move to implementation. We never move to action. We never move to intentionality. Today, we made an important step to move to action. And I just want to thank each one of you on this committee for helping us to do that, because this is important work. And if we don't move to action, then it's the next generation that will have to take on what we did not do. And I think we need to get this done. So I thank you all for your work in helping us to move this to action. Thanks so much.
All right, very good. Okay, well, we are, that item is complete. We're going to move on to item 4, returning to our regular order of events. Thank you again, Chair Jennings, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, Robert, please call the next item.
All right, item 4, Policy and Innovation Committee Charge and Look Ahead, presented by Eric Johnson.
Well, good morning again, committee members. Just briefly, because I know we're running short and we have some other items on the agenda. For the year ahead, I think there's just a couple things that wanted to make sure that you're aware of that the committee is focused on. The first, this committee is the committee where the Race, Equity, Inclusion Working Group will be reporting out. And so as that body works on supporting the development of our Race Equity Action Plan, which is really implementing the second half of that statement that you just took action on, those items will be coming back here later in the year. And then the other area, just to flag, and we'll say more about it in future meetings, and Christina Lockie may have a little bit later on the agenda, is that this is a significant year with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so while that took effect last year, there are so many implementing steps at the federal level and at SACOG and at the local level that's really going to change how we interact on federal transportation. And so we want to make sure you're aware of that, and we're taking all the opportunities as a region. And so that will be something that we're working with this committee and the Transportation Committee on. So aside from those two things, the changes to the committee charge are noted in the item, but it's going to be a busy, exciting year with that and the other major projects of SACOG coming before you as well. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, directors, anything? Okay, I guess we will revisit this one. Is there any public comment?
Yeah. No public comment on this.
Okay, all right.
Are we looking for a motion though? I thought we were.
Yeah, you do have to take an action every year on adopting the charge.
Yeah, so we'll modify as we go also, but as a starting point, we need to approve this. So I'll entertain a motion to approve item number 4.
Move approval of item number 4.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Thomas, second by Director Burris. Robert, please call the roll.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi, absent. Burris?
Aye.
Frericks?
Aye.
Stollard?
Aye.
Vice Chair Middleton? Absent. Vice Chair Thomas?
Aye.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, great. Let's call the next item.
All right, item 5, approve procurement of community-based organization and outreach services, presented by Rosie Ramos.
Thank you. Good morning, directors. Happy Monday. Rosie Ramos Gomez. I'm the Equity and Engagement Coordinator here at SACOG. And today I'm bringing you a request for this committee to recommend to the board to grant authorization to release a couple of procurement efforts for community engagement work. So what's in this particular ask? So as we mentioned in the staff report, there's a lot of emphasis from federal and state and local agencies on quality and meaningful engagement. This is a good thing because it allows for community voices and needs to be a bigger part of the decision-making process, very much related to the action that you just took. So here at SACOG, we are committed to refining our engagement strategies and focusing on this this new emphasis on it will allow us to continue to do that. So aside from external agencies paying close attention to this, it's a critical component to our race, equity, and inclusion work, which you just took action on, which is really exciting, which is to listen and to learn. So with this larger emphasis on listening and learning and creating stronger practices for meaningful engagement, we want to prepare for the work ahead by bringing on community experts to assist us. So this item highlights two procurement requests. One is a request for proposals, or an RFP, that will focus on one master agreement with a lead CBO, community-based organization, to help us coordinate engagement across the region. And this method allows for a specific task list to be included in the procurement, while allowing them to bring on more CBOs as subcontractors as we create focus groups and working groups. This is a particular need for the Engage, Empower, Implement funding round to come. And then the second ask is a request for qualifications, or the RFQ. And this approach would allow us to create a bench of pre-approved CBOs that we can call on as needed, allowing for a little bit more flexibility. So both of these methods are being pursued to meet the needs of, again, EEI, Green Means Go, Blueprint Engagement, and the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Framework Development, just to name a few. So all of the programs will need different levels of engagement, and that's why we're pursuing the two strategies, so that we can access as many CBOs as we can and as easy as possible. So bringing them on through this procurement process allows us to compensate the community experts for the work that they're doing, and as we do any other technical expert. And this is helping us overall to bring on this strategy as part of our internal processes and operating procedures. So I will pause there to see if you have any questions before I pass it on to Eric to go in a little bit more on the details of the procurement.
Directors, any questions so far?
Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Mr. Stollard, you are muted currently.
I wanted to congratulate Rosie on her graduation from Nueva Epoca, a new program for young Hispanic leaders. They're not necessarily always so young, but nevertheless, Hispanic leaders. She was in cohort 2, which just graduated this past week at a ceremony here in Woodland, along with Myra Vega, Mayor of Woodland. This is a great program, and I would just want to encourage all of you, if you know of smart people like Rosie who ought to be in a program like this, please nominate them. If you need help getting them nominated, I'm happy to help, as I'm sure Rosie would be as well. So, you know, with Nueva Epoca and Nehemiah Fellows, American Leadership Forum, we have lots of ways of helping people acquire skills and become parts of cohorts to expand their reach in the community. And I just want to thank Rosie for making us proud at SACOG for stepping up for this. And it was so cool to see AJ and Monica Hernandez there to cheer her on at her graduation. Thank you for my little side note.
Very good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Director Stollard. Ms. Ramos, I do have a question about the nature of a CBO that you're looking for. What's the general structure of that organization that you're trying to find?
So the CBO is a pretty flexible title, right? That can include a nonprofit, but essentially it's a representative group of a community.
Okay, so we're a 6-county region. That's very large territory. You're trying to ultimately engage one singular one in the short run and have a bench of others for other tasks, or are we trying to establish a pool to choose from when their skills fit the needs?
I would say it's both. And so that's why for the RFP, for example, for Engage, Empower, and Implement, we need one CBO that can help us organize a lot of different focus groups to make sure that we are being representative of the 6 county region. So they would help, they would bring on sub-consultants that are representative of the 6 counties. And that's one procurement effort. That is one group, one entity. But yes, the second approach would have a bench of CBOs that are going to be with a focus that it is inclusive of the 6 counties. So it's, I understand that we are a very big region, a lot of different needs. So as we bring on CBOs, it's about bringing on the rural perspective, the different needs based on race, equity, and inclusion. So it's focused on having that community voice as a pipeline as we're making these decisions in the planning process at SACOG.
Okay, so this CBO consultant, they're going to do community outreach. Can you just back up over what it is that their assignment will be, that first one?
Yeah, so for the mass, oh, sorry. Okay, so for the RFP, the one that has one CBO, they would be really focused on creating a working group for EEI, essentially, or for even Green Means Go and Blueprint engagement that is sort of an in-between, right? Because as an entity that is a regional entity, it is hard for us to get to that small local community level. And so the CBOs are working as a middle ground where they can sort of take in the information that we share, we can take in the information that they share, and creating these working groups allows us to tap into the community knowledge, but not necessarily, with the public directly, if that makes sense.
So their job is information gathering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, information gathering, sharing. As again, for EEI, we will definitely need to build out working groups that can help us create a framework development. And so as we move along with Green Means Go and guidelines, we also want their input on that type of engagement as well.
Okay, I'm just asking because the seems to be a little bit of a blurry line in that description between the staff's assignment and what this consultant might do. Maybe that's probably okay and appropriate in the short run, but it was not clear to me from the report.
Chair Kozlowski, sorry, if I just to maybe try to help. I think Rosie gave you a great answer, but I mean, just to kind of back to the statement, and Rosie just referenced this as well, the statement that you just adopted, right? Listen and learn, engage. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what we're trying to say, look, we know what we know, and there's a lot that we don't know. And in terms of actual sort of community engagement, we're really looking for folks that actually understand process, have a network, can gather information, that are just have a skill set that we don't necessarily have.
I guess what I'm getting to, and this is the sort of the granularity of the feedback that you want to gather, right? You got to choose, right? If we're trying to outreach to the African-American community, or we're trying to outreach to the various parts of the Hispanic community, or we're trying to outreach to the various parts of the Asian community, if we're just taking race as a first cut, right? And then you start to sort of peel back the onion on race, sort of rural versus urban and suburban as a middle ground. Those are, I guess I'm hopeful that you find somebody that has a window into all of those different areas, but I guess just prioritizing which ones you want to look at first, I guess, is really what my underlying question is about. Because if you choose a single, supplier, so to speak, of this outreach effort, they may be very well suited to some segment of those populations, but maybe not others. It seems unlikely that there would be somebody that would be very deeply connected to all of those segmentations.
I think that's an excellent point. And I think as we are looking for this one CBO, that's why we're going to build into the RFP is that we would also bring on those sub-consultants with them that are going to be able to tap into very particular different needs for each section of our region. So yes, we have one CBO that will help coordinate a lot of different folks, but we just don't have all the capacity to do that. So essentially they're triaging this effort for us, and we're going to work really closely together to make sure that the additional folks that get brought on as sub-consultants are going to be representative of the very diverse needs of our region.
Got it. Okay, very good. I don't have any other questions. Okay, if there's no other comment, do we have any public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Okay, directors, I'll entertain a motion to send this forward.
Move the item.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Frericks and a second by Director Thomas by a whisker. And please call the roll.
Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi, absent. Burris,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Stollard,
Aye.
Vice Chair Middleton, absent. Vice Chair Thomas,
Aye.
and Chair Kozlowski.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Ramos. Excellent work. All right, please call the next item.
We're on to item 7, the advocacy update presented by Christina Locke.
Hi, good morning. And I've got just a brief little PowerPoint to help guide our conversation today. Since we're at the beginning of the legislative year, I wanted to just focus on providing a higher level overview of what we expect in the year ahead. So starting first, our main priority for the year continues to be funding for helping accelerate, accelerating the PowerPoint, accelerating infill development, building off of our successes last year with Green Means Go, which we were able to secure $38 million. We know that that's considerably less funding than we need to meet even the beginning of our needs. And so we want to continue that conversation in the legislature and with the administration and also the federal government. One of the areas we want to focus on this year is really looking at our existing funding opportunities and identifying ways to help make our region more competitive, particularly in our rural and suburban jurisdictions when we're talking about projects that have to compete across the state. I'm really focusing on how the Sacramento region can be more competitive to get those dollars into our area. And then also focusing on additional funding. Our message last year really resonated about the need for funding for infrastructure improvements and also focusing on accelerating infill development, which is really resonated particularly with the administration, which actually included a narrative in its January budget proposal on the need to focus infill-oriented housing in order to help us meet both our climate and our housing goals. And so there really is an opportunity to continue to advocate for more funding with this focus. And in particular, we want to hone in on the IIG program, the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program. It's an existing program that helps fund infrastructure improvements. And you might be wondering, well, why haven't we been talking about this with Green Means Go? And it goes back to that issue of competitiveness. Our region is not competitive in this program for a lot of reasons. And so we really want to focus on how we can shift that and help make our region more competitive and also add in the narrative of helping us with these climate goals that come out of the sustainable community strategy requirements that we have to compete with. And this year we've got another budget surplus, and so that's really going to help, I think, in our advocacy. It really provides an avenue for this type of advocacy for infrastructure one-time funding. So moving on to the governor's proposed budget. In January, the governor released his proposed state budget of over $280 billion. His administration's estimating a budget surplus of $45.7 billion. Now that includes the remainder of this current year and then through the next fiscal year, 2022-2023. After the required state allocations to cover school appropriations, reserves, some funding for advancing payments for state pensions, there still remains $20.6 billion in discretionary funds for largely one-time budget allocations, since this is one-time funding. So the legislature is now in the process of holding their budget hearings on the governor's proposal. And with this large of a surplus, I think we're likely going to once again see a situation where we have many competing priorities as everyone eyes this excess funds. But it also creates a really great opportunity for us to continue to advocate for funding for infrastructure, particularly, again, because we're talking about one-time funding for projects with these one-time funds that we have in excess for in our state. Moving on now to another area where we will likely see conversation again, another deja vu moment. This year will be a continued focus on SB 375, which is the law governing our sustainable community strategies. There were three main bills last year to make changes to SB 375, one which the governor vetoed and two that did not pass out of the Senate by the required deadline. However, those authors have expressed interest in continuing the conversations this year. And so we will likely see some sort of proposal, although we don't yet know what that will look like or how many pieces of legislation that will entail. Adding to the conversation this year will be the release of the so-called AB 285 report. This was required by a bill, AB 285, authored by Assemblymember Friedman, who is, as a reminder, chair of Assembly Transportation Committee. She authored this bill in 2019 to require, among other things, the Strategic Growth Council to submit a report to the legislature with essentially an assessment of the gaps and alignments between the goals and plans in the state California Transportation Plan and regional sustainable community strategies plans, and then also looking at how that aligns with the transportation projects that are ultimately built. It's also supposed to review the potential impacts and opportunities for coordination of various state funding transportation funding programs, including making recommendations on how to better align these programs to meet long-term common goals, which is something that we've been talking a lot about as we've been advocating for funding for Green Maine's Go. So I think there's likely to be a lot of conversation and potential legislation that comes out based on the report. It was due at the end of last month. And as of Friday, at least, it still hadn't been submitted. The SGC Strategic Growth Council contracted with the UC system to do the report. Those authors gave a presentation on some draft findings to SGC last fall. And they're, I think, doing some tweaks and finalizing it. So we expect it out any day now. Moving on now to a federal update, and I'll kind of pause to see if there's any questions or comments before I get too far into changing subjects. And I don't see anything, so I'll.
I think you're okay to proceed.
Perfect, great. Don't want to rush it too much. So federally, as we all know, a lot's been happening. A lot is still on the horizon. The federal government has begun to implement the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which we're calling IIJ. So that's the federal transportation funding measure that passed last fall. The White House has planned a timeline for many, but not all of the grant opportunities. The fiscal year 2022 raised grants are the first out. They recently opened up with $1.5 billion in funding. And the Federal Transit Administration has announced that they've got two programs, the bus facility grants, as well as the low-no grants will be made available, they're expecting later this month. And we're going to really see a focus on existing programs first, because obviously it takes a bit of time. There's a lot of new programs created as well that will have to be developed. Putting a little bit of a wrinkle into the process, though, is that Congress has yet to pass a full year budget for this current fiscal year. And so this is going to impact and possibly delay implementation of IIJA. Right now, they're operating under what's called a continuing resolution, which essentially continues last fiscal year's funding in order to keep the government open. And so while we don't see any threat to IIJ, the funding for that legislation is secure and in danger. The mechanics are they're not quite able to spend the money and take some of the steps needed to further implement the legislation while we're in this limbo, as if you will, of the current continuing resolution. Continuing resolution. And so it should be nothing more of a formality in terms of IIJA, but it is limiting what the administration, United States Department of Transportation, can do while we're waiting for a final budget agreement. So the current continuing resolution expires February 18th. At this point, it is unclear if Congress will pass another short-term budget extension, essentially another continuing resolution, pass a full year continuing resolution to basically get us to the next fiscal year, but still have it be under the previous fiscal year's parameters. And this is actually what our DC lobbying team thinks will probably end up happening, although they, or I'm sorry, not that it will end up happening, but if it does end up happening, that it will include the language necessary for IIJ implementation. So if they do a full year continuing resolution, they'll put in language so that we don't kind of feel like, so there isn't this limbo for IIJ. Or they could actually come together and pass a final finished budget. I think it's very much up in the air, as typically is with these things. You hear every day changes and whether or not there's progress being made or setbacks in terms of continuing resolution or budget. Another issue that we hear quite a bit about kind of highs and lows is the Build Back Better plan. And right now, Democrats are looking at options to move forward with potentially smaller pieces of legislation rather than standalone bills, which I think they've moved away from at this point. But this could really be impacted by the Supreme Court Justice Breyer's recent announcement of his retirement. This announcement and the president's nomination is likely going to be a congressional focal point, particularly for the Senate throughout the spring. And so I think it's really going to probably hinder any effort to restore Build Back Better in some form. And it will likely impact a lot of the other work, obviously, that we were expecting to happen this spring. And then just lastly, I wanted to highlight regional coordination on grant opportunities. As Eric mentioned under his item, that there is considerable amount of federal funding. There's also a considerable amount of state funding and the potential for even more depending on how the surplus this year is spent. And so we really want to work in partnership with our members and our partner organizations to coordinate on these grant opportunities. And some of that means looking at, as these programs are being developed or there's new guidelines or regulations, going back to that, trying to figure out how to make our region more competitive and really looking at how we can be best poised in our region to access those funds. And then also working together as a region and with our partners in the application process for these various proposals. So it really runs the gamut from the creation of the program through to the actual applications being submitted for funding. And that is my overview of the year ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. Directors, any questions for Ms. Locke? All right. James, I think you had something you wanted to add to this.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, Chair Kozlowski. Well, in a sort of ongoing theme here of some staff appreciation and acknowledgement, I just want to let everybody know Christina's been with us around 4 years now, just a little bit less than the time I've been here. And I joked with her, it wasn't that actually funny for a while, but Green Means Go was like, we gave her the biggest task possible for kind of her first, out of the gate, like go secure some state funding for a region that has a tough time actually getting state funding. And she did that through Green Means Go. And that 38 million is a testament to Christina's hard work, her experience, her persistence. So she had just received a pretty big promotion here at SACOG. I'm happy to tell you that Christina is now Director of Legislative and External Affairs. With some departures like Monica last year, we're consolidating communications and outreach and legislation under one roof, which I know seems pretty typical for many agencies, but it's absolutely the right move for Christina. So my appreciation and thanks for her. I'm really excited about that team and its potential. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Congrats, Christina.
It's terrific. Congratulations, Christina. I was trying to figure out how to do the clapping hands that fall across the screen, but I couldn't find it. Anyway, great job. Good work. Thank you very much for your continuing hard work on everything. All right, great. Just as a quick time check, because I think we are down to 4 directors at this point at the moment. We have an update on the recently the mega region meeting that happened recently, and then a policy framework discussion. And we're definitely going to go through past noon to talk about both in their fullness. So the question, I guess, first is to Mr. Corliss. Can either one of these kick to our next meeting without disrupting the schedule of the main board?
I'm looking to Clint here as well, who was going to present these, I believe. I certainly think and especially Chair Kozlowski, since you're on the mega region working group, I feel like we can certainly hold that, or, give the full board an update or put it in my executive director report for the full board. As you know, from that meeting, it was a good meeting. I don't think there was anything that this committee absolutely needs to know or discuss. Now, in terms of the blueprint framework, I did want to look to Clint for that.
Yeah, I don't want to give short shrift to this. We end up in this situation frequently. If the board members that are with us currently can stay through the noon hour for a few minutes, I think we talk about this one, but I don't want to shortchange it, because I think
you're losing people at noon. That's my
hard stop.
I need to leave a little before noon. I have a noon lunch meeting that I need to go to, unfortunately.
Situation too.
Yeah.
All right.
Then we got to be
You got 17 minutes to make it really meaningful.
I can definitely do an abbreviated, just the bottom line of the framework for the long range plan, and then James's executive director report had the mega region highlights. So I think that one can certainly wait till the next meeting if that's your pleasure, Chair Kozlowski.
Well, I don't want to slow down the main board, but I don't want to approve something without it giving it proper consideration is all.
Sure. Let me pull up a slide deck for the framework item, and I will jump through that really quickly so that we can get to any discussion.
Okay, great.
And this item was taken up at the Transportation Committee. They are the lead committee for the long range plan update. So they recommended that to advance this policy framework to the board. So you'll be seeing this as an action or a consent item at your full board meeting. Real quick, James already gave a little bit of a preview of this, but MTP SES, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Communities Strategy, is the plan that we update every 4 years, but it is an alphabet soup of a name. It is the actual name for what this plan is called. And over time, we've updated our branding for it, but we've always kept that kind of alphabet soup of a name. I'm trying to advance quickly here, sorry. So for this next plan update, we are going with an actual name that this region is quite familiar with, the blueprint. So the blueprint was the plan we did 20 years ago, but we still live by many of those principles from that original document. Our long range plan, every single update we do pulls from the blueprint. It still tries to advance the blueprint. So a good way to honor that name that is still well known and put SACOG on the map across the country, across the state, is to name this the blueprint. So the 2024 blueprint is what we're calling this next plan to distinguish it from the original plan. But if you say blueprint, we all know what you are talking about. So the policy framework for this, really quick, this is your first big milestone you'll consider at your board meeting later this month, adopting this framework for the plan. This gives context, all of the discussions on the strategies, the policies in the plan, what goes into the plan, what doesn't go into the plan. Those will all be kind of given to you in the context of this policy framework, specifically what we're calling the triple bottom line framework. This is your first big action, but you'll see items on the the blueprint just about every month. You'll be taking actions on it roughly quarterly. It varies here and there. And we expect that this plan, it takes a while to update. So we expect we'll be adopting or asking for your adoption of this plan in February of 2024. So what's in the policy framework? There is a growth forecast. So that's the population, the housing, the jobs that we're expecting throughout the plan period. I'll talk a little bit about those. Garrett Valarosa is here to answer any questions, but he also gave you this presentation. So I'll go quickly back in December, but I'll go quickly through the high level take home points. Then there's the triple bottom line framework, which I'll also talk about a bit. And then our outreach and our engagement strategy. On the growth forecast, we are looking out to 2 horizon years, 2035 and 2050. 2050 is the horizon year for this next plan. 2035 is that really critical milestone year for our greenhouse gas reduction target that is given to us by the state. In terms of total population, it's close to the same amount of growth that we were planning for in the last plan, but the last plan only went out to 2040. So we're going out an additional 10 years. But what we saw through the update of our growth forecast is that population is just globally, nationally, and in the state is just at a slower annual rate than what we had forecast previously. That's just been an ongoing trend that it's slowing down. So this is about a 30% reduction in total population by the 2035 year, that interim year, but it gets us back up to a similar growth by 2050, which is around 20 to 25% total population growth across the region. Jobs, kind of the same story on jobs and on housing. 30% reduction by 2035 gets us close to the same, a little bit more by that 2050 horizon year. Really important point here, though, is that despite lower growth than the previous plan, the growth rates reflected in these projections are still higher than what you're seeing at the nation, at the state as a whole. So the Sacramento region still outcompetes for population, for jobs, for housing, much of the rest of the state. The triple bottom line framework is built around equity, economy, and environment. The equity statement, this might look familiar to you. This is pulled directly from the racial equity statement that you pushed forward this morning. We thought it'd be important for our long range, one of our major efforts at SACOG, to have it be perfectly consistent with the racial equity statement. So this comes directly from that. I won't go through this right now for the sake of time, but in your packet, in the attachment that goes through these major goal statements, there are also, it's not an exhaustive list, but there is a list of what does this actually mean in a long range plan? What are we going to do, or what are we going to investigate? What strategies might we put forth and bring to you for conversation? There is a kind of a bullet point list for each of these under or in your packet. Again, I'll just go quickly here. On the economy one, I wanted to pause, sorry, real quick. This is really, this statement is pulled and is propping up the prosperity strategy that we worked on, that SACOG worked on with the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, Valley Vision, the Sacramento Chamber, and now the Asian Chamber. A few years ago, we brought Brookings on to help us do an assessment of our economy in this region. And this economy goal statement is really trying to bring to the forefront the work that we do to support what we call tradable sectors in our region. Those are the sectors that basically export product or services and import wealth. And where we have a bit more of a competitive edge compared to other regions around agriculture and food, health sciences, innovative mobility. Those were the tradable sectors that we really want to stand up. But these are in no means the only parts of our economy that our plan needs to touch and needs to try to prop up or support. There's population serving businesses around the region. We need to make sure we're standing those up. But these are kind of the crux of the import or the wealth importing economies. One important note on the economy statement that was a blind spot in the framework that we sent to you and will be added in what comes to the board, and Sacramento County actually caught this. While this list wasn't supposed to be exhaustive, we didn't include Fix It First, which is the largest, maintenance is the largest expenditure category in our long range plan. It's one of the biggest needs in the region. And while it is kind of implied that it is going to be part of our plan, we didn't include it. So we are adding a statement to under the economy bucket that we need to prioritize Fix It First investments and protect and preserve and enhance our existing assets. Then on the final goal statement of environment, a little bit of delay there. While we do, if you were around for the last plan, you're all very familiar with the greenhouse gas target that we have with this plan, but that is not the only environmental goal that we have in our long range plan. We also need to make sure that over time we're cleaning up our air. We've got air quality challenges in our region. We're governed by the Clean Air Act. We need to make sure that over time we're making progress on reducing toxics in our air and protecting our residents and the air they breathe. We also want to build in more climate resiliency and adaptation into this plan. We're coming out of a historic wildfire season, a drought season, building in more indicators in this plan to understand how our region can build in some adaptation and resiliency, bring in your local climate action plan strategies is also going to be important for this plan. Last thing, and then I will stop, is our engagement strategy. I'll go ahead and stop sharing because I've got a little delay when I try to do that. The engagement strategy for our plan, we're really trying to make sure, obviously, we hit all of our federal and state requirements. The bottom line of our engagement strategy is we want to start earlier, not just with the public, but with stakeholders, with community-based organizations, but also with other electeds around the region. We have to have what are called info sessions with electeds, but they often come late in the process after we've made a lot of decisions as a SACOG body. Giving an opportunity to get out there. If you want presentations in front of your council, commissions, boards, James, myself, Binu, who's the project manager, she couldn't be here today, are more than happy to do that. But the bottom line for the engagement strategy is we want to get out earlier. We want to get a diverse group of residents and stakeholder groups able to participate, build in a feedback loop so that anybody who does give us input actually knows how that input has affected the plan or has been incorporated or considered in the plan update. And then I think that's it. Early, often, and then multiple pathways. So you don't have to show up to a workshop at a specific time. We have the option for you to go at your own pace from home through surveys, show up at a workshop. We try to make sure our workshops are where people are already gathering. That could be farmers markets, community events, any outreach that your local jurisdictions are doing. We want to make sure that we try to stay coordinated with those so that you're not running a parallel process and the region is coming in and running outreach at the same time you're doing something that can be confusing for residents. So we will work with you and your staff to make sure that we coordinate with any outreach efforts you're doing. That was very abbreviated, but I will stop there in case there are any questions or comments for us.
Thank you, Mr. Holton. The staff report in the agenda is comprehensive and excellent. Thank you. I guess Mr. Stollard or Ms. Burris, any comments?
No, I don't have any at this time.
Okay.
I don't either. This is still early in the process, but I really like the thinking that's being done. I'm so grateful to have it renamed as something simple. I like Blueprint 2024. I think that's really good.
And credit to you, Director Stollard, for could we just not have an acronym? Could we do something other than an acronym? You spoke, we listened. Yeah.
Good. All right. I don't have any comments or questions. It's a good way forward. Thank you. Okay. So any other items to discuss, or Executive Director, would you like to make any other reports to the remaining?
I didn't say thank you to Clint, if I could just do that, because I mean, that's probably the biggest single task we have at SACOG is the update of that plan. It goes on for 4 years and you have lots of balls in the air. So Clint, I'm glad you're on the job.
Thank you in advance and good luck. James, any final words of wisdom for us today?
And Chair Koslowski, you and I spoke a little bit about this last week, and we'll go, if you're on the strategic planning committee this afternoon, we'll go a little bit further into depth on this. We've got some pretty big, meaty challenges this year. As good as the news is that the dog that caught the car for Green Means Go funding, and these are good problems to have. An infrastructure bill with a whole bunch of grant money coming in. We have to really, when we say coordinate, we really mean it. We have got to be strategic in this region around what we all go for as a region federally. I think even just on the blueprint here, you're going to be hearing a lot more as the months proceed here around really trying to define some different pathways. Clint had to speed up that presentation, but the choices in front of us, just as they were 20 years ago under the first blueprint, are going to be really important in terms of what the region looks like in 2050. We're trying to figure out how to really articulate that and bring some data and good sort of policy discussion to you all. So lots more to come.
Excellent.
And congrats, Mr. Chair, on your first committee meeting.
Woohoo. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to adjourn the meeting, but I got to ask a question first. The actual printed agenda says that our next meeting names the date and says that it will be in the board meeting or the boardroom at SACOG. What's the likelihood of that?
You'd make that bet against it, you know.
Okay. All right.
Happening.
All right. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting. We will resume our deliberations on Monday, March 7th. 2022 at 10 a.m. Thank you to everybody for preparing an excellent agenda, and Clint for blasting through that last presentation. Appreciate it. All right. We're adjourned.